So, we came to Liptovský Mikuláš because of the death of Janosik, but it turns out that little town has way more to offer. So, for example, already in the very market square, you are going to see a little fountain and a name, Aurel Stodola. You've never heard of him? Well, Einstein did. Turns out the guy was a genius, and the great humanist Einstein himself adored him. And if that's not enough, there's another guy called Penkala, a great inventor. 80 different things he invented, among them a thermophor, the rubber bag for hot water. Super important. They actually did not live here. They were just born in Liptovský Mikuláš or around. Still, it is obviously a claim to fame for the town. And I would love to tell you more about them both. But they dealt with engineering, with chemistry and physics, so fields I know nothing about. So look them up on the internet. I would like to show you something else. Now the building looks like an opera or a theater, right? It's a bit in the middle of nowhere though. And it's slightly dilapidated because it is neither a theater nor an opera. You are looking at a synagogue. Now, if you have any doubts, you are going to see a bit of Hebrew, which is obviously a giveaway. Plus, you will see little rocks laying here on the side in memory of the Jewish community before the war. Now, the thing is, that's one of our perversions, so to speak. Both me and Vicky, we love, let's call it the Jewish topics. So wherever we go, we try to look for a synagogue or anything really connected to the general Jewishness. So we knew there is a synagogue here, but we did not expect that. Turns out Liptovský Mikuláš, the Jewish community here, was big, relatively big and important. My favorite example, there is a type of cheese from the mountains called brindza. It's mostly based on sheep milk, and it is considered now very important all around Slovakia. Beginning of the 20th century, there was a company from Liptovský Mikuláš which started the trend, and the company was Jewish. Now, no wonder that the synagogue is so amazing and beautiful and big and everything, but you may be thinking, Jews, probably you have an image in your mind of a Hasidic Jew, a religious person. Now, what you are seeing is most definitely not an Orthodox synagogue, especially from the outside, looking very, you would say Christian maybe, very classical, like an opera, right? The Jewish community of Liptovský Mikuláš most definitely was not Orthodox. They were called neologists in old Hungarian crown. That was the way they would call themselves. In other words, the community was assimilated. And if we have doubts, have a look at the photos. Those people are most definitely, most of them, not religious. Anyway, let me show you another little thing, which is obviously the sad part of the story. The cemetery did not survive. And not the war really. It was in the 60s turned into a park. So only a couple of tombstones survived, and of course the community itself, most of them perished during the Second World War during the extermination. But that's a separate topic. We are going to go back to that. Now let me show you just a couple of extra photos because the place was absolutely amazing. We were very surprised, and it turned out later it is officially considered one of the most beautiful synagogues in all of Slovakia today. But now let's get into the topic for today. It kind of begins in Liptovský Mikuláš actually, 1844. A number of people started an association called Tatrin, kind of a first Slovak cultural association. And 4 years later, 1848, beginning of the so-called springtime of nations. Social revolutions everywhere, and Hungarians, for example, they want autonomy and independence from Vienna. But then there are a number of people who want to have independence from Budapest as well. So in May 48, a group of Slovak intellectuals drafted a document, The Demands of the Slovak Nation. In details, let me tell you about it in a different town. Here we are walking up and down the main drag of the of Martin, or as the full name says, Turciański Saint Martin. Well, anyway, let's use the short version. The thing is, for my taste, definitely too many signs. This looks a bit like Poland in the 90s, where there was no actual law protecting the historical streets, and the signs are pretty much everywhere here. But that's not the important bit. Maybe this is not the biggest town in Slovakia, maybe not the most beautiful one, well, for sure not the most beautiful one. But that's not important. What's important is the location. Now, first of all, you can see the mountains in the background, and that's already one important clue. This place is surrounded by mountains. So for hundreds of years, here the influences from outside were scarce. And when the Slovaks start thinking of creating their national identity, this is the place that was chosen in the middle of 19th century. Codification of the Slovak language, it is the dialect from Martin and around that was chosen as the one that should be spoken by all Slovaks. And supposedly the people here today are very proud that they speak the purest version of the language. But now let's get back for a moment to those demands of the Slovak nation. So there were 14 points. Some of them were aimed at Vienna, for example, getting rid of the remains of feudalism, but most were aimed at the Hungarians. Slovaks demanded, well, autonomy within the Hungarian crown, to put it simply. For example, the linguistic autonomy. Hungarians did not like it, not a little bit, and they imposed martial law in Upper Hungary, in what is Slovakia today, and Hungarians decided then to secede officially from the Hungarian crown, and they started a revolution, something today called an uprising. 48-49 it happened. It is considered today national, although in reality only between 3,000 and 5,000 volunteers were fighting in the revolutionary Slovak army. Ironically, there were more ethnic Slovaks fighting in the Hungarian army than in the Slovak one. Anyway, what's important for us now is one of the most important successes was taking Martin, and here many volunteers did join the Slovak army as Martin felt nationally conscious, so to speak. In the end, the uprising failed, but it did happen. The demands of the Slovak nation was pretty much the first political document of the Slovaks, and although the revolution failed and they gained nothing, the demands were not heard, it did happen, and it was not forgotten. It is the beginning of the 60s of the 19th century, and the Austrian absolutism is failing. Now the thing is, Hungarians especially wanted independence or some kind of degree of autonomy from Vienna. So when Hungarians started asking Vienna for autonomy, Slovaks started doing again the same. Here in Martin in 1861 they wrote another memorandum, I would say more realistic. They wanted autonomy within the Hungarian crown, political or better administrative. Those parts of the Hungarian crown with Slovak majority should have administrative autonomy. Maybe more important for us, cultural and linguistic. They wanted, for example, in those parts of the Hungarian crown with Slovak majority, that Slovak should be spoken in schools, in courts, in administration. And they wanted a cultural entity. And they got it. Not with the Martin Memorandum, by the way, that was rejected, but they didn't give up. After all, that was already a good beginning, so they wrote another one called Vienna Memorandum, but pretty much a copy of the one from here, and that worked. So there was a degree of administration, autonomy, there was a degree of linguistic autonomy, but what's the most important bit? It's the building behind me. That's 1863 Matica Slovenska. So basically a cultural Slovak entity. And here it begins. This place pretty much shaped, we could say, the Slovak national identity. The most important intellectuals were here. They started writing books, and not simply like before some kind of romantic stuff or something. It was actual proper science. So for example, those guys started understanding that the village life, the folk culture, is not simply a nice thing to paint or write about. You could actually deal with it scientifically. So they started describing it, getting deeper into it, and also they started teaching the folk, so to speak, that they should have a national identity. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I think you understand that was not something that Hungarians liked very much, to have another nation having a proper national identity. So the Matica lasted actually only 12 years. Already in 75, it was cancelled. Now, what's important, those 12 years it existed. Even if it was cancelled officially, that was too late. The damage was done, so to speak. After the First World War, Matica was reinstated, and it actually exists till the very day. Now today, supposedly it's a bit controversial, because it has a very particular ideological leaning today. Several years ago they made another kind of memorandum saying that they are against the globalization and the liberal life of today, and the Western values. They want to preserve conservatist Christian values of the folk culture. Now, supposedly there's another cultural entity today, and I'm sorry to say I forgot the name of it, but it's to the contrary. So supposedly now there's a ideological battle between two cultural and ideological centers for the soul of the Slovaks. Now, however you would judge Matica today, there's no doubt this is an extremely important place when it comes to history. This is pretty much a place where Slovaks were shaped. And I would put it that way for the younger folks. Think of the people working here back in the day as influencers of the middle of 19th century. And the building behind you was their Instagram. Now here is the moment when I start raging. In 1869, also here in Martin, another very interesting thing was created. A group called Živena, which is officially the first female association of Slovak women. And there's nothing about it. I haven't seen a plaque or a monument, hardly any information in museums. And maybe there is something, but I haven't found it. And it's extremely important because when Matica was cancelled, it is Živena which took over preserving of the national identity. And it is probably the only time in European history when a female association is responsible for maintaining national identity. And there's pretty much nothing. I have to put here random photos of women from museums. And in another one, well, there was one woman from Živena in a bit more detail. But that's it. On Slovak Wikipedia there's a bit about it, but it's not translated into any other language, which I find a scandal and a disgrace. But it's not the first time, or the last, I guess, when women do not appear in official history. So, enough of raging, talking about official history. One more very important thing which happened here is already more modern times, 1918. End of October, something called the Martin Declaration. Slovaks here officially decided to leave the Hungarian side and join up with the Czechs. So this is the place where officially Slovaks declared they want to build a new country, that they want to build Czechoslovakia. But that's another interesting topic which we are going to talk about in more detail later. Now, to continue the story of national identity, one more important place, a cemetery, well, better, national pantheon. It started with the most important members of the Matica Slovenska being buried here, but then simply important people. Some of them we actually met. In the second part of folk culture, I showed you a bit of modern art, and here they are, Mikuláš Galanda and Martin Benka. You can find their art in the National Gallery of Martin. But in the first part, in the first skansen, I showed you a little school and I told you there's an important poet. Here he is, Hviezdoslav. So a number of people that we already met. are buried in the cemetery, but of course many more, and in total 300 important people for Slovak culture. Yet another symbol of Martin being kind of a cultural Slovak capital. So here's the thing. We came to Martin to learn about national identity of the Slovaks, but it turns out there's a pretty awesome little district full of buildings from the 50s, which on its own is nothing really interesting, but those buildings are full of awesome folk style graffitos. So we're just gonna walk around because there's gonna be a huge wave of rain coming in a second or two, so I hope we're not gonna get super wet and we're gonna have time to get some photos. So see you soon. So here is another of our little perversions. We love communism, as in not the ideology itself, but the history of it. In the end, modern times also provide interesting stories. And back in Kraków we have a district called Nowa Huta, which is pretty much an ideal communist town built after the war. And very interesting place with very interesting history, so we like finding places somewhere else which are similar. And there is a little district in Martin which is pretty much like Nowa Huta itself. It was built at the beginning of the 50s and it has a very similar feel. As it turns out, they have here in Czech Republic and Slovakia a term for it. They call it sorela, from social, realism and Lacome, which is supposedly the most important architect of the time. And there you go. It is a little planned district, and the plan itself, well, it is social realism, comes from Moscow, so you will see plenty of places like that all around Central Eastern Europe. But Sorela especially loved the folk additions, and that's it. You can see what you can find pretty much anywhere in Central Eastern Europe, but upgraded with those beautiful, beautiful sgraffitos. We loved it a lot, and as you can see, we did take many, many photos. It turned out for us to be a hidden gem of the city of Martin, and we are most definitely going to be on the lookout for more Sorela in the future. And if those buildings get a little facelift, maybe I would even consider living in a place like that. A long day of visiting and important stories and so on and so forth. So it's time to rest. Or maybe not really, maybe it's time for more work, but of a different kind. It's time to charge, so it's time for food. And when it's time for food, I guess we should try supposedly the Slovak national dish. Time for bryndzové kalušky. And here they are. It's as simple as it gets. So you put basically mashed potatoes with wheat flour, and that's in kind of a sheep cheese sauce, and on top a bit of meat. Here's the same plate, roughly 10-15 minutes later. I guess I liked it. What a national day we're having today. The National Cultural Center, the language, even the National Cemetery, and now the national dish. It can't get any more Slovak national than that. Oh yes, it can. But that's a different episode for the future, and a different town we are going to be talking about the beginning of the 20th century. But for now, thank you for being here with me, and I will see you soon.